Good day everyone. We're going to report about Chapter 10, Managing Employee Performance. My name is Katrina Faye Francisco.
I am Larry Haraza.
And I am Cheska Daradar.
Our report is all about Chapter 10, Managing Employee Performance, and I'm going to discuss Lesson 2.1, the types of performance issues. Let's start with issue number 1. First, constantly late or leaves early. This causes an employee to fall behind their work and either rush things or leaves their work uncompleted. While we know that flexible schedule can provide a work-life balance, managing this flexible schedule is a key. If you notice that a staff member is persistently arriving late, this should be dealt with accordingly. Or otherwise, the employee is questioned, may think that this is not an issue and start turning up late even more. Therefore, an employee that is continually late is effectively stealing time from the company. Number 2, too much time spent doing personal things at work. Most companies have a policy about using a computer or phone for personal use. For most companies, some personal use is fine, but it can become a problem if someone doesn't know where to draw the line. So, as an employee, you should separate your personal work and your personal life and be professional. Number 3, inability to handle proprietary information. Companies handle important client and patient information. The ability to keep this information private for the protection of others is important for the success of the company. As failure to protect or secure confidential information may not only lead to the loss of business or clients, but it also unlocks the danger of confidential information being misused to commit illegal activity such as fraud, which is a key element of confidentiality is that it helps build trust. Number 4, family issues. Childcare issues at work, divorce, or other family challenges can not only cause absenteeism but also poor work quality. Absenteeism is defined as an habitual pattern of not going to work. Number 5, drug and alcohol abuse. U.S. Department of Labor says that 40% of industrial fatalities and 47% of industrial injury can be tied to alcohol consumption. U.S. Department of Labor estimates that employees who use substances are 25 to 30% less productive and miss work 3 times more than non-abusing employees. Keep in mind that when we talk about substance abuse, we are not only talking about illegal drugs, but also prescription drugs like prescription pain reliever, tranquilizer, or sedative for non-medical purposes, as this substance can cause obvious problems such as tardiness, absenteeism, and non-performance, but can also result in accidents or other more serious issues. Number 6 is non-performing. Sometimes, employees are just not performing at their peak, and some causes may include family or personal issues. But sometimes, it can mean motivational issues or lack of tools and or ability to do their current job. Number 7, conflicts with management or other employees. When it is normal to have the occasional conflict at work, some employees seem to have more than average owing to personal issues, and of course, this affects on a great organization productivity. Number 8, theft. The number of surrounding employee theft are staggering. The American Marketing Association estimates 10 billion is lost annually owing to employees theft, with the FBI estimates up to 150 billion annually, and obviously this is a serious employee problem that must be addressed. Number 9, ethical breaches. The most common reported ethical breaches by the employee include lying, withholding information, abusive behavior, and misreporting time or hours worked according to a national business ethics study. Sharing certain proprietary information when it is against company policy or violating non-compete agreements are also considered ethical violations. Many companies also have a non-fraternization policy that restricts management from socializing with non-management employees. Number 10, harassment. Engagement of sexual harassment, bullying, or other types of harassment would be considered an issue to be dealt with immediately and be depending on the severity may result in immediate termination. Number 11, employee conduct outside the workplace. Speaking poorly of the organization on blogs or Facebook is an example of conduct occurring outside the workplace that could violate company policy. Violating specific company policies outside work could also result in termination. For example, in 2010, 13 Virgin Atlantic employees were fired after posting criticism about customers and joking about the lack of safety of Virgin airplanes in a public Facebook group. So, we all have 11 examples of performance issues. This list provides some insights into the types of problems that may be experienced. As you can see, some of these problems are more serious than others, and issues may only require a warning, while some may require a warning and immediate dismissal. And as an HR professional, it is your job to develop policy procedures for dealing with such problems. Next slide is on how to handle attendance problems. At many organizations, a no-fault attendance plan is put into place. In this type of plan, employees are allowed a certain number of absences. When they exceed that number, a progressive discipline process begins that might result in dismissal of an employee. For example, a company might give 1/2 point for a tardy employee, 1 point for an absent that is called in the night before work, and 2 points for a no-called and no-show absence. When an employee reaches a certain number determined by the company, he or she should be disciplined. This type of policy is advantageous in industries in which unplanned absences have a direct effect on productivity, such as manufacturing and production. Another advantage is that managers do not need to make judgment calls on what is excused versus an unexcused absence, and this can result in fairness to all employees. So now, let's move on to the next slide, and I'm going to discuss Lesson 2.2 entitled, What Influences Performance? So when an employee isn't performing as expected, it can be very disappointing. When you consider the amount of time it takes to recruit, hire, and train someone, it can be very disappointing to find that a person has performance issues. Sometimes, performance issues can be related to something personal, such as drug or alcohol abuse, but often it is a combination of factors. Some of these factors can be internal, while others may be external. Internal factors may include the following. First, career goals are not being met with the job. Means that your goals are not in line with the job that you have, so it can become a problem. Second, there is a conflict with other employees or the manager, or you have some misunderstanding with your colleagues and it may become an internal issue. Third is the goals or expectations are not in line with the employee's abilities. Number 4, the employee's views on fairness in the workplace, or unfair treatment typically overlaps with discrimination and harassment, constitute any treatment that leaves an employee feeling degraded, humiliated, offended, or intimidated. In addition, an employee may not feel able to complain, particularly if the bully is a manager or more senior than them. Fifth, the employee manages time poorly by not planning ahead or not setting priorities or not having clear goals. If you constantly let them interfere with your work, then expect consequences like running late, rushing, missing deadlines, and you can also forget about reaching any of the goals you set as well. Number 6, the employee is dissatisfied with the job. This can be due to various professional and personal reasons such as lack of advancement, poor management, limited work-life balance, and more. Dissatisfied employees can negatively affect company because they typically lack motivation, perform poorly, and possess negative attitudes. So these symptoms have a way of spreading to other employees, infecting entire departments and the company bottom line. So now, some of the external factors may include the following. First, the employer doesn't have a correct equipment or tools to perform the job. Ensuring your employees have the right tools to do their job can benefit their productivity, but perhaps, even more importantly, it may affect their job satisfaction. So it is important to select the right tools for the job when working with tools, because the wrong tools can not only make the job more difficult, but can also pose a safety hazard. Number 2, the job design is incorrect. It can be a problem as job design is very important because this is the process which makes sure that the job remains updated and it is relevant to the employee. The main objective here is to reduce the satisfaction which comes with while holding the job on daily basis. Number 3, external motivations factors are absent. There is a lack of management support. Even worse than the lack of recognition is the feeling of lack of support. This can be the case of an employee receiving hardly any guidance for the task entrusted or what is the goals or priorities or his in her work. Number 4, the employee's skills and job are mismatched. Simply put, it is a mismatch between skills and jobs. This means that education and training are not providing the skills demanded in the labor market, or that the economy does not create job that corresponds to the skills of an individual. So all in all, the internal reasons speak to the importance once again of hiring the right person to begin with. The external reasons may be something that can be easily addressed and fixed. Whether the reason is internal or external, the performance issue must be handled in a timely manner. So now, let's move on to the next slide.
Next, I'm going to discuss defining discipline. Discipline is defined as the process that corrects undesirable behavior. The goal of the discipline process shouldn't necessarily to be punished, but to help the employee meet performance expectations. Discipline is a form of action to train and practice employee to abide regulations and conditions in order for them to become a valuable and contributing member of the workforce. To have an effective discipline process, rules and policies need to be in place and communicated so all employees know the expectations. Here are some guidelines on creation of rules and organizational policies. 1. All rules or procedures should be in a written document. Yes, it is important to make procedures that is well written to provide a roadmap for daily operations to look organized and easy to navigate. 2. Rules should be related to safety and productivity of the organization. Yes, if you have a well-planned safety, impacts productivity and quality of work because when you have a safer workplace, it results to have an improved and productive workforce. 3. Rules should be written clearly so no ambiguity occurs between different managers. Yes, the rules must be double-checked before it is imposed so that there will be no room for misunderstanding, alteration, and conflicts. 4. Supervisors, managers, and human resources should communicate rules clearly in orientation, training, and via other methods. It is also important that leaders should put emphasis about the rules every now and then so that it reach everyone and followed by them. Number 5, rules should be revised periodically. As the organization's needs change, by reviewing your rules regularly, you can keep your business up to date also and ensure your policies are consistent and effective. Number 6, consistent approach to managing employee. In order to maintain the rules consistently, managers inside the organization must communicate effectively to avoid conflicts, confusions, and call out wrongful behavior to an employee. Now let's move on to the next slide. The role of performance appraisal in discipline. Performance appraisal is a form of evaluation or assessment to give feedback to the overall performance of an employee. If the employee wasn't able to meet the expectation of the performance appraisals, the performance issue model will be used to correct the behavior. Performance issue model is a model that can be used to develop policies around performance for fairness and consistency. We can view performance issues in 5 different areas. Number 1, mandated issue is usually one that deals with safety or legal issues that go beyond the workplace. It is one of the issues that goes beyond the company and could be a law. Example, an employee sharing information that violates privacy laws and not following safety procedures or engaging in sexual harassment. This type of issues need to be handled swiftly by firing his or her, giving her or his a written warning, or by developing a policy on how mandated issue will be handled. Number 2, single incident. Include a misstep of the employee and he or she should immediately be spoken with to ensure it doesn't happen again. Any kind of act that occurs violent or inappropriate and insulting is a form of bad attitude. Example, employee misspeaks and insults some colleagues, or perhaps he or she was over budget or late on a project. Sometimes this type of incidents can be solved through conversation or by coaching and by working on the employee's behavior. Number 3, pattern. Behavior pattern occurs when an employee consistently exhibits a performance issue. This type of issue should be discussed with the employee and plans taken, such as more training, to ensure it does not continue again. This can occur when the employee doesn't think the incident is a big deal because he hasn't been correct before or may not even realize he's doing something wrong. So it is important for a manager to guide and correct the wrongdoings of an employee to avoid further conflicts. However, when employees still continue to display this kind of behavior pattern, although he has been corrected in that part, we call this persistent pattern, which is number 4. Persistent pattern occurs when an employee consistently exhibits a performance issue and does not improve, despite the human resource talking with them or her. This kind of employees correct the problem after an initial discussion, but then fall back into old habits. The employee still exhibits this behavior pattern. In this case of handling performance issue, it is important to let the employee know that the problem is serious and further action will be taken if it still continues. Number 5, disciplinary intervention. Disciplinary action will likely need to be taken when employee shows no skills and knowledge about performing the job after all. It is important to develop consistent procedures on how to record and handle disciplinary issues. Most employers use a progressive discipline process to accomplish these goals. When employee still continues to be non-performing and has no skill or knowledge about performing the job after all, you can utilize a discipline process.
Now, I am going to discuss lesson 2.6, which is investigation on performance issues. It is the responsibility of the human resource management as professionals to conduct a thorough investigation to analyze the situation if found out that there was a performance issue among the employees. As part of the process, the managers are entitled or should note how to document the said situation and have it documented for the future use as the very first step of handling performance issues of the employees. Proper documentation is the next step, and it should be necessarily be shown as proof if the employee would have to be removed in the position if proven guilty for the performance issue. There are steps to be followed to issue the proper documentation needed, and that is: first, state the date of the event. Second, time of the event. When and what is the time of date of the performance issue to know if they are telling the truth or not. And to be able to ask for proof like who were they was or look for CCTV footage as evidence, followed by the location, only if it is applicable in the event. Where did this happen? Is it within the company premises or not? After that is state the performance issue. What happens and what is the cause of the performance issue? Then, notes of the discussion with the employees that is involved in this issue. Next after is to know if the other employee should commit the same infraction. Then lastly is the signature both from the manager and the employee. Having all this proper documentation, the people involved in the issue would clearly know what next step they should conduct, since mandated issue is usually one of that deals with the safety or legal issues that go beyond the workplace. An infringement of this type of issue requires immediate attention. Investigative interview is used to make sure that the employee is fully aware of what means of the discipline issue. This kind of interview is only to be conducted once the issue has been documented. One more thing, this type of interview requires a private meeting place to give employees a chance to explain their sides as well as to avoid some trouble or disturbance in both sides while conducting the interview. However, in a unionized organization or a workplace belonging to a labor union, the employees involved in the disciplinary issue is entitled to have union representative at the meeting or in the investigative interview. Meaning, you have the right to be represented
by your union fairly, with good faith and without discrimination. Next slide. Now, I am going to discuss lesson 2.7, which is options for handling performance issues. The last phase of dealing with disciplinary issues would be a disciplinary intervention that is often called a progressive discipline process, of which refers to a series of steps taking a corrective actions on non-performance issues. In this part, HR management take actions to ensure that the process is of the scope of the rules, that nothing has intervened in the process to make it into fair outcome for the employee. This process is going to be useful if the offense is not so serious to resolve and does not insist or ask authoritatively for dismissal, such as an employee theft, as well as any other offensive action that requires termination of contract of the employee. The progressive discipline process should be documented and should be applied to all employees committing the same offenses. Next slide.
Now, I'm going to discuss Lesson 2.8 entitled Alternative Dispute Resolution. Another option in handling disputes, performance issues, and termination is the Alternative Dispute Resolution, or also known as ADR. Alternative dispute resolution is the resolution process and techniques that parties can use to settle disputes with the help of a third party. This method can be effective in getting two parties to come to a resolution. In ADR, an unbiased third party looks at the facts in the case and tries to help the parties come to an agreement. Some organizations use a step review system. In this type of system, the performance issue is reviewed by higher levels of management. Some organizations also implement a peer resolution system. This type of system, a committee of management and employees are formed to review employee complaints or discipline issues. Next slide is all about Lesson 2.9 entitled Employee Separation. Employee separation can occur in any of these scenarios. First, resignation. Resignation means that the employee chooses to leave the organization. First, if an employee resigns, normally he or she will provide the manager with a formal resignation email. Then, the human resource professional usually schedules an exit interview, which can consist of an informal confidential discussion as to why the employee is leaving the organization. Second, the employee is terminated for one or more of the performance issues. If it is determined that the employee should be terminated, different steps would be taken done in a resignation. First, documentation is necessary. It should be noted that the reliability and validity of performance appraisals should be checked before dismissing an employee. Third is absconding. Absconding is when the employee decides to leave the organization without resigning and following the normal process. Depending on previous contracts, the employee may be entitled to severance package. A severance package could include pay benefits and other compensations for which an employee is entitled when they leave an organization. So the purpose of severance plan is to assist employee while he or she seeks another employment in another company. Next slide.
Now I'm going to discuss about right sizing and layoffs. Right sizing refers to the process of reducing the total size of employees to ultimately save on cost, which would be to reduce staff to save money or to right size, while layoffs is the termination of the employment of status of a hired worker. When a company decides to right size, they must cut costs through layoffs of employment or employees. This includes process of layoffs. Number 1, develop our criteria. Number 2, people selected or selection. And number 3, severance packages. And next slide. Talk about employee rights. Employee rights is defined as the ability to receive fair treatment from employees. Number 1, job protection rights is the right of an employee to any legal injustices done by the employer. There are 3 main exemptions to this principle. Number 1, public policy exemption. With a public policy exemption, an employer may not fire an employee if it would violate the individual state's doctrine or statute. Number 2, implied contract exception in a breach of an implied contract, the discharged employee can prove that the employer indicated that the employee has job security. The indication that does not need to be formally written, only implied. Number 3, good faith and fair dealing exemption. In the good faith and fair dealing exemption, the discharged employee contends that he was not treated fairly. Other considerations for job protection are also as follows in the next slide. Number 1, whistleblowing refers to an employee telling the public about ethical or legal violation of his or her organization. This protection was granted in 1989 and extended through the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. Many organizations create whistleblowing policies and a mechanism to report illegal or unethical practices within the organization. Number 2, implied contract. It is a legally binding obligation that derives from action, conduct, or circumstances of one or more parties in an agreement. It is important for a manager and HR to communicate very well to avoid implying an employee has a contract with the organization. Number 3, constructive discharge mean the conditions are so poor that the employee had no choice but to leave the organization. Number 4, Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, or WARN, is a law that requires companies of 100 or more employees to notify employees and the community if 50 or more employees are to be laid off. If an employer violates this law, it can be subject to back pay for employees. Number 5, retaliatory discharge is one that occurs if an employer fires or lays off an employee owing to a charge the employee filed. It is a punishment of an employee for engaging in a protected activity such as filing a discrimination charge or opposing illegal employer practices.
Now for the next lesson, which is lesson 3.2, privacy rights. Here in privacy rights of the employees, it is an issue that an HR management must address. Although there are circumstances that privacy policy should be considered before putting it in effective use. Privacy helps us establish boundaries to limit who has access to our personal space, places, and things, as well as our communication and our information. It is a proficient way or a thorough process to develop policies surrounding what type of monitoring may occur within an organization. In fact, there is an existing organization such as Digital Footprints Incorporated that can be relied on in terms of tracking the cost of leaking privacy content from the company. May it be posting online and exploiting through verbal communications or any means of passing an information. This kind of monitoring can be useful and helpful in tracking violations of an employee's to his/her company policies and regulations. But the downgrade of this monitoring is the expenses because considering the thorough process conducted while monitoring it will be costly. So consider the nature of the workplace before acquiring the software and the management. For example, some organizations monitor email, computer usage, and even postings on social media network sites to know if the employee was using their work hours doing a personal online activity using the company property. Another thing about these privacy rights is to know the well-being and the health status of the employees, whether or not they take harmful medicines or drugs that can cause turbulence in their work. That's why a drug testing is also a privacy issue. Although in many industries, requiring safe working conditions such as drug testing can be necessary to ensure the safety of all employees. In addition, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA, mandates that health information should be private, and therefore it is good practice to keep health information in a separate file as well. Medical marijuana is a relatively new issue that is still being addressed in states that allow its use. For example, if the company requires a drug test and the employee shows positive for marijuana use, asking the employee to prove it is being used for medical purposes violate HIPAA privacy laws. This issue is certainly one to watch over the coming years. Now, we are down to the last slide, which is 3.3 Labor Unions. A union is a group of workers who decide to work together. It is an organization formed by employees to negotiate the terms and conditions of their transaction to the employer or creating a collective bargaining agreement. This agreement allows workers to negotiate as one, rather than as individuals, as well as labor unions is such an important thing to be discussed when it comes to this valuable discourse, since these contracts are the frequent organizations that process for layoff discipline. The Wagner Act, passed in 1935, addresses many issues related to workers' unionization, saying that the process is seen to be unfair, just like the means to negotiate a contract between management and workers that is found out to be a collectively bargaining process. Many employers feel it is not in the best interest of the organization to unionize, so they will engage in strategies to prevent unionization, and thus Wagner Act 1935 interfered in the issue with the unfair negotiations. They established another act called Taft-Hartley Act. This act is a new set of standards for fair practices by the unions within the unionized environment. However, the Taft-Hartley Act says that employers can express their views about unions but may not threaten employees with loss of job or other benefits if they unionize. Some of the talking points organizations might express about unions include the following. First, less ability to deal more informally with the organization. Second, possibility of strikes. Third, payment of union dues by employees. Fourth, emphasis on what positive aspects of employer has provided. Interest-based bargaining occurs when mutual interests are discussed, rather than starting with a list of demands. Once an agreement is reached, HR is generally responsible for knowing the agreement and implementing any changes that should occur as a result of the agreement. One such example is understanding the other source of complaint or protest, especially under unfair treatment. And that's end our report. Thank you.